just watching. Zoom, zoom, zoom.
Welcome to Brand Formula, a new podcast focused on the marketing and brands at play in Formula One today. Your hosts are myself, I'm Mordecai, and my co-host is Elyssa Margulis. Between us, we have 30 years of marketing experience across agencies, in-house at brands, digital platforms, content studios, and more. We're also big F1 fans. Elyssa was raised on F1 from childhood, and I am a Drive to Survive COVID convert. Each week, we will bring to you our takes on F1's marketing paddock and beyond. We'll analyze the advertising and marketing moves being made, the audience as it continues to evolve across markets, and look at white spaces we think need to be covered. Who is seeing an ROI and who's DNF'd? Thank you for listening, and please support us by following wherever you follow. We are at Brand Formula Pod, and subscribe wherever you are listening. Now, let's talk the brand formulas shaping F1 today. On to the episode. Welcome to Brand Formula. It's episode 9, and what a race we have had. Lots of cars were spinning. My head is still spinning. I actually went and watched Charles's win in Monaco just to recenter myself that good things can happen in F1. Not that I don't think Kimi raising a water bottle on the top podium in Miami wasn't fabulous. I did not like MBS pouring it on him, but it was a great weekend from over here in London watching on Sky Sports, but I was a voyeur, and I was grateful voyeur that I am. You were in Miami.
I was in Miami. I didn't get to go to the track, though. It's interesting talking to a lot of people that did get to go and were there. And while I've not experienced it, it made me a little bit less jealous because it's true when you're there, you're just watching zoom, 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 and you're listening to the race in your ear because it's obviously you're not able to see the whole track. So I kind of loved that I got to watch it in the McLaren fan zone. There was no Ferrari fan zone. Obviously, I would have been there if I could. But I spent a lot of the weekend with the McLaren team and some of the nicest people that I've ever met. And so amazing to be able to watch with people that work at the McLaren HQ who love motorsport. So it brought really a different vibe. And we talk so much about fandom on the podcast, and it was really an opportunity to get to be a fan. I also learned that the McLaren team considers Ferrari friends, so it was okay that I was wearing red in the McLaren zone. But it was interesting being in Miami, having just done our episode about cities and how they're monetizing and marketing F1, because I think I expected to step in to Miami and the whole town be like one big fan experience. And that wasn't really the case. It was far quieter than I thought it was going to be. The fan zones that I went to were not nearly as packed as I thought that they were going to be. And a lot of people in a lot of those activations seem to just be people in Miami and not necessarily people in Miami for F1. And so it brought just a different perspective of what it looks like, I think, to be a fan in a city and not be going to the actual track in the city. So a lot of ideas for how teams can just activate and bring people into the experience in new ways. So many, many takeaways on that end. And I will say, I thought Cadillac probably did the best of any team in terms of activation. And really, it's really cool to see them bring the consumer side with the racing side together in an activation, which was just brilliant. And kudos to them.
Yeah, I know we talked about it on our podcast, but the thing that became just overwhelmingly true was just you really saw that it is a B2B marketplace. When we were watching qualifying, we being me and all other viewers, there were empty seats, and qualifying is often some of the most exciting, especially if you're right at the end line. That's some of the most exciting bits of the entire weekend that you can see. And you didn't see people there. I didn't see people like at the Hard Rock VIP area or the MSC cruise. Like they just weren't watching, and it was just very sparse no matter what you saw. And it goes to that high price point, what people are doing in America with these races. And though there were definitely, I mean, I saw the Argentina fans were there in all their Colapinta glory, but you really saw that it was a B2B marketplace, that people were really selfieing in the VIP paddock rooms, and that was the content coming out. Although there was this really great shot of an overpass that had a bunch of tow trucks and cop cars parked to the side, and then all of said drivers of those trucks, where it was probably about the dozen of them, were all at this overpass with a amazing view. But it definitely was a race that, though there were a lot of great fans and American fans there, when you were watching it, you definitely felt like it was really a lot of business happening.
And I, obviously being in the marketing and sales adjacent world, met up with a number of people that work either within B2B organizations or partners of teams. So Deloitte and McLaren, Logitech and McLaren, Sonic and McLaren. I was obviously with a lot of McLaren people over
Yes.
the weekend. So, there was that. IBM, but it really felt a little bit more like being at a B2B conference.
Mhm.
I actually, the places that I saw Root fans and Met fans was more out in the street, walking around Wynwood, walking around Brickell, eating at restaurants. You saw people wearing their team colors. People, if you were wearing Ferrari and someone else was wearing Ferrari, they would say something to you. That was very, very cool. But in terms of who was really there to go to the race, definitely felt very B2B. I had a meeting in the Ritz-Carlton, bougie, which is where I will say, the Mercedes team was staying, which was pretty awesome because it was the morning of the sprint race quali. And so all the teams were leaving in their sprinter vans. And it was like fangirling of fangirling. But anyway, there was massive signs. Salesforce was bringing probably 100 people to the track, and other B2B entities were there, almost like they were bringing people to a cruise ship. That's how it felt, with the signs to kind of
There
follow to
was there
your
was a
right
cruise ship
sprinter.
there, so
There was a cruise ship. That is true. That is true. And a lot of people I talked to that did go to some of the VIP paddock experiences because of a B2B relationship said, yeah, they weren't that packed and it was business. People are chatting, they're
Mhm.
talking. They're a bit less there for the race and they are more there for schmoozing. So we'll see how that continues to go. I did feel like Miami was a lot emptier, and from the locals that I talked to, this seemed to be the emptiest that the city had been for a race in quite some time. So I was curious if that was maybe because there was this 5 week downtime. It's so expensive, not sure what those factors were, but I'm interested to see what some of the numbers are coming out.
Yeah, especially because we had learned from last year that Miami is significantly larger than any of the other US races, Vegas and Austin. So I'd be curious to know. But in terms of fan experiences, I know there was the big fan experience because of McLaren, your new besties, because it was their thousandth race. And I mean, I saw some of it. I saw Oscar driving Lewis's car, but that looked like a lot of great fans having some fun.
Yeah, so they had a massive, massive experience. It almost felt a bit like a festival experience more than anything. I guess I didn't really realize how spread apart everything was going to be. So they took over this massive area called Regatta Harbor, but you have to drive there, you have to get there. It's not like you can just walk from fan experience to fan experience like you could in the ones that were in Wynwood, for instance. McLaren was really more of a destination, and they expected a lot more people than were there. It felt really, really empty. Now, I wasn't there on Wednesday, which is when that was the only day you had to register for a ticket. And that's when the cars were out. And yes, I would have loved to see them all fired up. I did get to go behind the ropes and touch all of the cars and hear all of their history and meet Lando, one of his race engineers that helped build the car last year. So that was really, really amazing. And I think people that were a real motorsport or real McLaren fans were probably like, this is the best of the best if you don't actually get to go to the race. But yeah, I felt a little bummed for them because it did feel like it wasn't as big as they expected. It just felt really sparse. It was very, very spread out. Now, one amazing thing though there's a massive hangar in the harbor that's for boats. And it's all covered. And so they had screens, they had really cool activations inside that hangar. That's where all the cars were. And so they got to bring everything inside for the race on Sunday because it was raining and obviously we're worried about everything being out in thunder or lightning. So that was great. And it was pretty full on Sunday because it was in that self-contained area. And I thought they did a really great job of just getting everyone excited and like cheering. And there's people wearing all different team kits. But
Mhm.
one thing that it felt a little bit of a miss is that I don't think you would know that it was their thousandth race by being in that fan experience. They didn't have a stage and a DJ and announcements and things that some of the other fan experiences had. It felt a little bit more celebratory and party-ish, whereas McLaren
Mhm.
felt a little bit more like conferencey. You could do the sim and you can wear VR and do a pit stop and there's a Google Gemini, test your knowledge. And it felt a little bit more like a conference, which I thought was interesting. Whereas a Cadillac and Audi and Williams were like party and had these really fun things.
Mhm.
And McLaren felt a little bit more um stale, if you will, like good people and good energy, but just a little bit of a different vibe. So, you
Yeah.
know, we'll see how that grows. This is their biggest activation because it was their thousandth race. So interested to see how they adapt it moving forward.
Yeah, interesting. I too at the weekend was buying F1 car. I went to the Puma store in London and went and saw Charles's 2022 Ferrari. Did a little hop spot over there and in my very minute way of spending time with a car, it was interesting. There were four young girls that went up to where the car was with me and they were all giggly and excited, and then there were like two teenage boys getting like all the right selfies for their setup. It was really cute, but and it was cool to see the car because that was the year that Charles started to win because there were those two drought years that he had to suffer
We
for.
won't talk about them.
We won't talk about that, but so it was a good car to see, and that was nice, but it made me think, and I was kind of looking out for it all weekend, most likely because I know the people that have been behind it, and I was curious if they were not continuing the relationship, but I noticed that I thought there would be a plus 44 drop in Miami. There usually is, plus 44 being Lewis Hamilton's sort of drop. I'm not even, I wanna call it's classic network streetwear. So, it's an occasion and you get these drops of style, but I think he may have dropped it for Ferrari style, which he launched some new social about it and getting more involved in that. But I will say from my Puma store experience, so obviously when I'm there, you can buy merch from not only Ferrari, but McLaren and then Aston Martin as well, who are the three Puma teams. And I did not buy anything because red is just, as much as I like it, it's a like from afar color except on my nails. But it was just that reminder of like, my goodness, the price point on this traditional merch in particular. Like I have a Yuki Tsunoda sweatshirt that I got from the Red Flags podcast. I have a Carlos Sainz Smooth Operator shirt, that kind of thing. But you were in the merch capital for F1. Did you saw people wearing different merch and but it is just so expensive, isn't it?
Yeah, it was really, really insane, and a lot of people that I talked to found it just to be so unattainable, even the least expensive products. So I went to an Apple event, which was in a insane mall, in the Aventura Mall, and so I took some time to walk around. There's a Ferrari store there. There's a Porsche store there. Adidas had a whole Audi collab. So I went store to store to really see what there was outside of track merch and outside of team merch. And even those collabs that are at more of your high street kind of brands like an Adidas are more expensive price points than their standard merch. I did see some people buying it for sure. And I asked some people and they said, well, we're here for the race, or we're here because we love this team. And so we're going to spend that money.
Hmm.
But it did feel like we're moving just into this unattainable space. And I think we have to think about where this luxury of F1 intersects with the reality of what we're seeing. Especially we're in two countries where everything is more expensive right now. So it felt a little bit of a bummer because F1 is building a fan base. It meant to be a more attainable, an easier entry point into the sport. And so if you want to wear that and show that, it's really hard to do and you really got to save up for it. And some of my favorite collabs that I saw were just so beyond expensive. I mean, I would have loved to buy the Namias collabs. $400, $3,000 for a jacket. The people that I talked to that went to the track in the F1 merch stores, the least expensive items were $110. I did not know that there's like an F1 outlet kind of hidden at the track, which I thought was hysterical because uh, it's discounted, and those hats were 55. So even that is just so expensive. McLaren
Yeah.
did a bunch of Reese collaborations I thought were really, really good, though I think they could
That
push it a
black
little bit.
jumper. I want that
Yeah,
black jumper, but it's like
there
200
was some good
pounds.
stuff.
Yeah.
It was
Hmm.
expensive. The more attainable merch that they did was the thousandth race custom custom shirts that they did in partnership with a local artist, which was really,
Hmm.
really cool. But they were 55, 65 up to 150 for a sweatshirt. So yeah,
I mean,
I'm torn.
I think and is the subject we'll kind of cover a little bit in our brand formulas, but it's everything is sort of about eyeballs, become a fan of the sport, become a fan of the sport, but the entry is so high and you need to retain you will not be everyone's new favorite. We just know that from basic understanding of audience. It's not going to last. People die off and people lose interest in what they have. And so the idea that everything is the barrier to entry is higher and higher, I think the same thing in terms of if we're talking about other sports marketing, like what's happening with the World Cup in North America. You know, the idea of how expensive it is to travel, to go, the way it's set up. It's just a lack of understanding with what the actual marketplace is. And one of the things I find interesting about your take in Miami is we're going to talk about this in terms of making sure you retain the female fans. But I'm curious why they must, and I'm sure they are marketing. I'm not saying there's no one in marketing covering it, but that's a huge Latin community. And when you look at what has happened in Argentina in the last week with Colapinto, again, there were fans there. I saw them nonstop. But knowing, you have Bortoleto there, you have the different Spanish drivers. You can count Carlos Sainz in that space and Alonso. There's that
Che-
affinity.
Checo, I mean,
Checo,
yeah,
and the idea that they haven't catered to that marketplace and been able to tap into that fandom. And I just think it goes into what we talked about, that it's a B2B marketplace and it's as long as we make X amount of dollars, we've done our job, but fans propel a sport forward. There's no exclusivity if no one goes. So
yeah.
where do you
And
end
that's
up?
part of I think Cadillac, again, in my personal opinion, did one of the best jobs from a fan experience because someone there thought about not just the Cadillac fan base, the intersection of the history of that fan base, the future of that fan base, but also the local market. And there was activation specifically for women. They had a nail station, they had a hair touch up station in partnership with other brands also. So GHD Hair was doing the hair touch up station at Cadillac. They had little local flavor food. You know, they really did bring in the Miami and that Latin experience crossing over with the American experience in a way that I thought was natural and authentic and engaging people. Even they had a low rider there, like tapping into just the culture of car in Miami, which I also appreciated. Whereas what I thought was fascinating, it's an American team understanding an American fan base and an American market. And then you go to the Williams activation, and I was like, oh, they just don't even know what to do. And same, I think McLaren, they really focused on the sport and didn't really think about the general city vibe and the people that were going to be there. And so, again, the atmosphere of Cadillac was much more
Mhm.
Miami esque than you saw at some of those other places. They had different DJs, they were playing reggaeton at one point. Like it was fun. It was really fun.
I think we have to give it up for Cassidy Towers for that. I mean, she was interviewed on Sky with her husband, who is the owner. She has so stepped forward and she talks predominantly. So when they're interviewed, she comes forward a lot more. You can tell she's much more engaged in the details that you're talking about with Cadillac and what her role is there. I mean, those touches, the fact that even the black and white of the livery finally crystallized for me when she was talking about it this weekend of like, this is the blank page that they are beginning with. And I think that narrative style, that way of approaching things is really helping Cadillac keep that authentic. It was their first home race in quotes for Miami, and it was really exciting to see how they're going about things. And I do just give a lot of credit to her. I mean, she has put herself in the forefront, but I think when I hear you talk about it and I've heard her talk at the weekend, it's the same story. And it's like, look, you've translated that, and which is really exciting to hear. And on the note of women in motorsport, that Cassidy Towers was, that was also a phrase that almost canceled Apple for a hot minute, if we're to be dramatic
Yeah.
about it. But it was the caption that got a lot of attention. And you spent some time with Apple, and they had more than that in terms of their weekend experience as they sort of relaunched, I think, in the time. I mean, everyone was sort of relaunching this weekend.
Yeah, it definitely you saw brands really take that unexpected break to rethink how they were going to market, what messages they were going to get out, how they were going to talk about their partnerships. But it was really, I think, Apple's kind of weekend in Miami. They were doing so much. And from a social perspective, if you're following at all any kind of F1 creator or the teams, you saw that Apple brought tons and tons of people to Miami to really activate and tell the story in a much broader sense. So yeah, we'll get into the caption that got the internet in a flurry. But what I thought was very interesting for them is that they spent $150 million to acquire the F1 rights in the US, and it happened really, really fast. And so my guess is it's a massive organization, a lot of hierarchy. They didn't really have time to figure out what does that look like from a content perspective. They also tend to be content acquirers, not necessarily content makers. Whereas when F1 was with ESPN, that's an entire ecosystem built to create content and marketing around sports. And so they obviously were able to do it and build this world around F1 in a way that Apple didn't have the time to and is not used to. So I really liked that they started these pre-show, post-show shows. It was nice to see Nico Rosberg. We always The man loves a hot take. So, very interested to see how that continues. But Apple's pre show now, Circuits in Focus with Nico, Amelia Hartford. So, really diving into that pre race, giving exclusive content within that Apple ecosystem. And then this was also the first time they did a post race POV show. So, they're really trying to take that Sky Sports, ESPN kind of style and make it their own. So, interested to see what that looks like. And then on the ground, they really did have people everywhere. So I actually went to an Apple event with Susie Wolf for the launch of her book that was at the Apple Store Aventura. They brought creators there to help cover it and to talk about that. I mean, I was speechless because just to be in the midst of such an icon, and loved the way that she talked about how she got into the sport, what that looked like, and obviously if you weren't there you didn't necessarily see that. So that was very smart for Apple to bring creators specifically to that event to help get that message out. And they were at the track all weekend. They were all over everywhere in Miami, and it was across many different verticals. You saw fashion, media, culture, and F1 fans that were there with Apple telling those stories. So we'll see. Is that going to convert into new viewers, into people getting Apple TV just to watch F1? I'm not sure. I think maybe some of the fashion creators could bring new fans in, but I just don't know that those are going to be people that watch the race. I think that that's people that are now aware of Apple and F1 being partners, but is that going to convert into subscribers and viewers? We're going to have to kind of see. It was also the first weekend that Apple had their IMAX partnership. So that's viewing the races in IMAX theaters. I haven't seen any numbers come out yet, but $30 tickets across the country. So, very interested. I want to know how many people bought them, what that experience looked like. I'm definitely going to do it one weekend. I want to know and I want to see. And I mean, there's nothing better than the sound of an F1 car in an IMAX theater, I'm sure. So, we'll see what they do there. But back really quick, we have to talk a little bit about marketing and copywriting because Apple did have a little bit of backlash in a dinner that they did in Miami celebrating F1 weekend and the choice of words in the caption. Was it for women in F1 or was it for the women of F1? And a lot of debate came out because who was at that dinner? It was WAGs and creators for the most part. And so you didn't actually have the women that are changing F1. There was no engineers, there's no drivers. Now, I will say that those women were working. They were at the track when this dinner was most likely happening. When you're on a race weekend and you're working in Formula One, you are not going out and about. You are literally at that track all day, every day, getting home late, working on your job. So I understand why those women would not be there. But, you know, where's the line between being in and of, and what does that mean? It was a beautiful dinner. The whole dinner was
Looks gorgeous.
inspired by the racetrack, and the flowers were in piston vases. I mean, it was beautiful and it was gorgeous. And I just I'm grappling with this entry of F1 into the WAGs kind of world that the NFL has become. And I'm not sure that that backlash would happen maybe with other sports where there isn't such an emphasis right now around bringing women into the sport in new ways, whether that's as drivers, engineers, behind the scenes, on the track. And so you really entered a world of conversation that is bound to happen at a time when a sport is being held up to that kind of microscope. So we'll see what they do at the next dinner.
I mean, I think all of those women are wonderfully vibrant women. I heard a great interview with Kelly Piquet while she was in the paddock. I know that Alexandra Charles's wife had her framed denim launch. It's like all over every ad platform I have.
My
I'm served it
algorithm
right
is
now. Yeah.
full.
Um,
Beautiful content, by
and
the way.
yeah, absolutely looks fantastic. She speaks like 4 languages in it. It's amazing. And, much respect to all of them. But I think what stands out for me in this is that I think we need to really start looking at this from an acquisition funnel point of view. And though we're talking about a lot of eyeballs, our TikToks and Instagram, we follow most of these ladies. I think they're interesting, charismatic women of the world. I think we also need to give Lily a shout out because Lily is an engineer, Oscar's partner, and, give her a little bit of props. She's be a great women of and in F1 because I think she
Very
does work
true.
for McLaren right now. But she's gone to school and is an engineer on that side. But I think it's the fact that there are so many ways to keep this acquisition alive, and that though it is a glossy creator story from a high, sort of above the line point of view, it doesn't keep the retention of this audience. And I really am finding, and one of the things we wanted to sort of cover today is just to understand that we have to evolve to actually keep all of this momentum of female fandom, which is half your audience right now and growing. How are you going to create marketing techniques and tools that aren't missing the mark so much? Now, it's always a question when something like what happened with that copy on the Instagram post, it's like who was in the room that allowed that to happen. You always have to look at that. I also saw Bella, who I think now is a Sky reporter. She did a thing with Ted where they talked about the new regulations, and it was done where Ted was like the baffling mansplainer and she was the young eye-rolling feminist. And it was these tropes that I don't really think of either of them. I don't find Ted Kravitz to be a mansplainer. I find him a gatherer of information, and he's just translating that to all of us, like him and his little notepad running around in the pit lane. And Bella, I find her just like loving to enjoy and have a fandom, but also, is a little bit like Amelia de Moldenberg of just like, you really have to shock me, but that's not an eye roller. That's someone that's just like, this is exciting, but I need more. And I just found a lot of the content at the weekend. Naomi Schiff's amazing ensembles aside. She returned this week from her maternity leave, and she was wearing all of these suits with like Bermuda short / culottes and like cute little glasses. So I'm just saying, great fit. And no Danica is always a good thing. So that was a
Very true.
wonderful treat. But it was in the Sky side, and I really want to watch now, see if I can see this Nico Rosberg Apple show pre and post. That sounds exciting. But we had a lot of golf was covered in the pre-show, and it was just like, what are you doing? Like, what is this content? Because I could see that all those female content creators were there, and just the idea that something in their own algorithm, their own market research is saying, oh, well, people that like F1 like golf. So let's go to the golf courses and show what everyone did in the last 5 weeks. And it was ridiculously boring. I don't need to see the Sky commentators and old F1 players on a golf course talking about golf. If I wanted that, I'd have Sky Golf. It just was, yeah, just such a reminder. And we talked about female fandom before about, don't pink it and shrink it. And I don't mind the experiential girly treats. We like nails. You had great nails, I know, for Miami. These are all positive things, but they're so one note and not larger retention based that it just made me think of, how can we help here? How can we provide like a brand formula? Because they have to capitalize on this growth engine or it's just gonna go. It's a commercial vulnerability for F1 to not have a clear CRM strategy for how they're gonna actually put this into a dedicated acquisition funnel right now.
Well, it does also come down to audience research, and you said it. I mean, we had the 14th ever woman to stand on the podium this weekend. That's a massive, massive story, and one that, at least in my algorithm, and you would think it would come to me first because of what I watch all day and the amount of creators that I follow that are women and that are not just in the F1 space, but I follow a lot of women in sports creators. And it wasn't something that was necessarily flooded in the same way that the Kentucky Derby story was flooded in my feeds,
Yeah.
where you had your first ever woman win the Kentucky Derby is a huge, huge story. And because that's a massive sport that's seen in this global space and it happens only one time a year, that story really, really pulled people in. Is it converting them to watching horse racing? No, it's just a story. So they don't have the same problem that F1 does. And I think F1 really needs to think about understanding the niches of the audience. You can't just say, okay, well, we're now almost 50% female fans, fastest growing fan base. You need to break that down. What are their personas? What do they care about outside of F1? You know, golf is going to be that for the historical male viewers of F1. So great, that makes sense. But there's a lot more nuance in building what that funnel looks like, and to your point, retaining that and pushing them down. You can be a casual viewer. How do you become a fanatic? How do you become someone that then goes to races? And what does that look like? What does it look like within your community? What does it look like within your algorithm? We're all served things based on some robots idea of who we are and what we care about. And that's the real brand marketing work, is truly understanding that audience strategy first.
Absolutely. So let's give a few tips. I'm going to start with some no-nos overall, which is very akin to are you in F1 or are you of F1? But, just do not market at women, market to women. Things that sell to women right now: access, intelligence, and emotion. Are you hitting those pillars with your F1 narratives? And for those narratives, don't dictate. Tell a story. Don't just read the owner's manual for this. It is known that particularly women in this space, we're talking high-end editorial visual design with dense, high intellect data. Like, we want to talk about, like, it looks good and it feels good and I'm understanding it. I can see it in a number of ways, and that will grow a sense of intellectual respect, which allows that fandom to want to know more. So, just a few areas for F1 to consider. So, we told the things in our first female fandom episode about things to avoid. These would be things to grow into. So, I first want to touch on something to optimize the first time fan. So, what does that look like for a first time ticket buyer? Because by nature, the idea of a woman going to an F1 race all on her own is a daunting prospect, just like a lot of spaces. So, I'm not shading Formula One in particular for that. I know there's a lot of other women there, but it's a high bar. So, there should be some kind of CRM trigger in that allows you to end up in a curated experience. So does that queue up a verified fan community app? Is it a WhatsApp that you're brought into where you can ask questions and have some customer service there? Do you get a Race 101 film that's specific to that track of like what's going on? Do you have a good seat? Is there a welcome pack on site hosting them? This isn't about wooing creators. This is about your first time fan. That should be your CRM trigger for it. And the idea that you can go solo, I mean, I spend 8 hours as we both do, on our weekends watching this. I had a friend in town all weekend. She's not spending 8 hours watching this with me. We found
Definitely
each
not.
other, like buried needles in a
Need
haystack, and
some
we
alone
FaceTime.
time.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love that. I think there's even beyond going to the race, you bring up such a good point, just back to that kind of the archetypes and the understanding of your audience. It's also that not everyone's going to go all the way in, and not everyone's going to just watch on social. There is this entire arc of what that can mean and how you find those people, and you need to offer a path and let people choose which one. It's not just one in and done. So I love that.
Mhm.
And it was interesting because, like I said, I was not at the race, but meeting other people and you have something in common already. And so that opens up a funnel for connection, a funnel for marketing, eventually a funnel for buying something. If you can find people that you can connect to, can inspire you to make some of those purchases. But the thing about F1, also to your point of needing some of that content and needing some of that work done, is that it's harder to be an F1 fan because there's 22 different cars, teams, you know, your choices are very, very wide. It's not the same as choosing a football, whether that be soccer or American football
Mhm.
team. And you're just in and they play in their division and then they go here. It's very, very simple to structure that people can follow. And F1 is much more complicated. And so requires a little bit more help.
Yeah. And, we are experiencing this. And like just this, another tip is start owning the communities that are being built. We ourselves we're new at this, but our first experiential of our own is our viewing party. And we're partnering with the Sunday Society girls who do live viewing events in Dallas and London and really encourage that sense of community. And just, spoiler in our pre planning calls, it's awesome. It's awesome to be with other people and we talk a lot in our chats with different folks. And if you do want to follow us at Brand Formula Pod, but we have that nice connection. It really is important. And the idea of harnessing that community, being a place of safety and convenience and allowing for some exclusivity, some essential status in that to allow for crowdsourcing of bringing people together like a pregame and being able to give them places of not so when you create a community, it's like, here, I'm bringing all of you female fans of F1, but we're going to provide you a hub for input, show you the impact of the decisions that you can make so you can start having brand affinity. And this is all using the tools of your F1 sponsors, your Oracle, your AWS, fostering that community to get input from them, to get them more engaged in all of the things that they're so curious about, which goes into the next top tip, which would be to reconfigure your sponsorship and partnership strategies. And you and I could go on this all day long. Don't just slap a logo and say, see ya once I get my, lead gen at the end of it. But the bottom line is women convert at 50% when you have an experience in sports marketing. The male fans, it's 0.1% that you're going to convert to a customer. That means that you need to
Wild.
move from just wild, which means you need to be moving from visibility to usability. So translate the jargon between engineer and driver. Go back to that solo fan idea and be a concierge. Marriott, Hilton, take in that space. Don't make it a photo booth, make it a data suite. Remember these pillars of how people want to be thinking, this intellectual respect for the sport, because there is no way you can be a Formula One fan and just be there because, oh, I like a fast car. It's so much more layered than that. And so just wanted to highlight those things. Also, to be looking at this CRM system and stop moving from I need to transact. And this is for brands everywhere. I would be having this conversation, but stop focusing on the transaction and move to the relationship. This goes into things that I speak on outside of this podcast of the business of AI friendship and companion consumerism. These emotion-driven opt-in decisions to start sharing data, to start being a part of things. And, to your point about the fashion influencers, you should be able to choose your areas of interest. If I'm just subscribing to Adweek, I get to choose my areas of interest. Do you want to follow a team? Do you want to follow all of the different people moving around the paddock? Do you want family trees of what that looks like? I mean, you just basically would see everyone leaving Red Bull and see where they go. But do you want to talk about the culture, the fashion? I mean, we have one of our most popular videos is your breakdown of the Mission Winnow and talking about what happened with those cigarette cars going around. And, or are you just a country person? You like your local race and you want to know about it. Making sure that you are creating a narrative that keeps people into what they know, and then they will continue to tick more boxes as they go further into it, which means that you need to be looking at new data. So,
100%. I love how your idea of the B2B partners being true partners beyond just how they're powering the team, but what does that look like from a fan experience? But it's so interesting because F1 itself doesn't have that ecosystem. It's so how do you build that from a team perspective up into a sport perspective? Because right now, so much of that is being held within the specific teams and how they utilize that data, their own world building for their fandom, which gets even more confusing because as a fan, you're forced to do a lot of work to go figure it out because it is not coming from a kind of top down knowledge into those teams. You almost need to reverse engineer it up from what you learn from the team that you want to follow up into the sport. So
mhm,
I'm hope I hope the future looks like that. And it does sound like so many teams are looking to understand their data through these partnerships. We even saw that at McLaren with what they were doing with Logitech and with Gemini and Dell on site at their fan experience. But if you're not a McLaren fan, where does that leave you?
mhm. Yeah, and this is the nature of sport marketing too, is that just because think about the London Marathon that just ended, like Adidas had a total win there. The top 3 finishers wore that new Adidas shoe that's coming out. Now, everyone's not going to get that Adidas shoe. Everyone doesn't need that Adidas shoe. But your 10K runner is probably going to buy an Adidas shoe now that's in that family because they have the aspiration to be running well. You don't have to
Yep.
do the full marathon. Or if you're going traveling, it's just like a kinship for that Adidas. And there's these fantastic pillars of understanding that really speak to why female fans have gravitated towards the sport that need to be in that acquisition funnel of understanding, are they a technical aspirant? Are they a strategic observer? I'm a Bernie Collins stan. I'm definitely would tick the strategic observer box. Or are they about community? I think the Sunday Society girls that I mentioned, they love being with other women around sport. And that is the space they want to be in. They love being a fan and watching it happen and having these conversations. Or is this about the culture? Have you been brought in by the lore of what motor racing is all about? Have you seen Elyssa drive around and been like, lights out, lights out. I want to be a part of that. And all of these opportunities, and you have to evolve the data that you're collecting, evolve the story that you're having, and really go about it. And so, you know, I know that we're seeing a lot of movements. McLaren did their Liquid IV partnership that I know was just profiled in Forbes. And it is exciting, but we always want to push it into, again, how can it be a utility for female fans, a utility for them to get closer and closer into the sport? And what an occasion for brands to be able to step into it. And, watching this weekend and the emptiness and the B2B focus, I understand the purpose that that serves. But we have this opportunity. You've mentioned a few different sports, and we both have, but like if you look at the NFL or the Kentucky Derby, there's so much ancillary esteemed things that speak to different people. You go to the Kentucky Derby, you wear the hats. If you go to polo, you push in the divots. If you go to the NFL, you're singing songs, you're tailgating, all of these things. F1 has the opportunity to really build that out in America. And otherwise, I do know that Europe has a bit of a tailgate thing happening at Silverstone and the camping, but you have these opportunities to hub narratives. And if you're going to do that, you have to build it intentional to all of your fans and really make sure that you're
100%.
retaining it, because you can't have campers outside that Miami stadium if you haven't created a safe environment for women. And that's a part of this too, is that a woman isn't going to show up to F1 all alone unless you allow her to be safe in that space. It's just a factual truth.
Very true. Very true. And I do think F1 has a welcoming environment to
Mhm.
it where, again, people, you just have a kinship by seeing what you're wearing, whether you like or dislike that other person's team shirt. You're all there for the same reason. And I think that is something that is very welcoming, very positive, that you kind of see those people gravitate and find each other, which is definitely not something to forget about, especially if you are the Sephoras and the Dermalogicas and some of these brands that are specifically targeting the female fan. I did not see as much stories from them, even though they were at the track and there was all of these women there creating content. I weirdly was seeing much more of the Amexes and IBMs and Johnny Walker than these more traditionally male focused brands having paid these women to come to the race versus seeing people in the Sephora suite and at the Dermalogica event. So we'll
Yeah.
we'll see what happens at the next US race when they're there.
Yeah. I also just think it's not going to work I mean, I don't think it works anymore anyway, is to just do a selfie and say, hey, we're here. And that does not convert me into a customer. And you have
No.
such an opportunity because it's such an amount of time, an F1 race over the entire weekend. So it'd be great to see that evolve. And if anyone wants to talk sponsorship and partnership strategies, hit us up. But with that said, I guess you don't get jet lag from Miami, but
No, but
in
I could use a nap. I could use a nap.
okay. So thank you all for being here for episode 9. We hope you enjoyed and didn't feel too much FOMO. I'm so on it because I did enjoy my couch for the race. But we are Brand Formula, an F1 marketing podcast. We're here pretty much every week. You may not hear from us for 1 week, but as we break down the formulas for the brands around F1 teams, drivers, cities, as we talked about, the FIA, and kind of talk about what they're doing on and off the grid today with some helpful tips. So please like and subscribe and do all the following at Brand Formula Pod. We are building up our channels. Your support would mean the world. We occasionally get a little crafty with a post and some of our clips here. So thank you for listening and goodbye for now. Lights out.
Lights out.